It's about an hour before sunrise, somewhere around 12,200 BC, and you're sleeping on a roof. Not because anything is wrong, that's just where people sleep. The roof is the coolest spot around. The house is made of mud brick, and that mud has been trapping the previous day's heat since about 2 in the afternoon. Your neck rests on a wooden headrest, which sounds uncomfortable, but actually works better than it sounds. Below you sits a village of maybe 68 homes, tucked against a desert hillside on the west side of Thebes. You're not a ruler. You're almost certainly not a temple official either. Statistics say you're a farmer. And if you're not a farmer, you're probably one of the craftsmen carving out the inside of a royal tomb. Either way, you need to be at work in about 90 minutes. So what does a normal day actually look like? Here's something strange. We know a huge amount about ancient Egypt. We know their beliefs about what happened to a person's heart after death. We know the names of their deities, the design of their temples, how they made embalming fluid, and the exact weight used to judge a soul. 3,000 years of an unbroken civilization, and we've got the paperwork. Yet almost nobody can tell you what an ordinary Egyptian did on an ordinary Tuesday. That's what this is about. Not the tombs. Not the treasure. The Tuesday. Breakfast, the walk to work, arguments with the boss, why everyone's teeth fell apart by age 30, the earliest labor walkout on record, and a 4,000-year-old logbook kept by a mid-level supervisor who was literally helping build the Great Pyramid and complaining about boat scheduling while he did it. The thing nobody mentions about Egypt. Here's the setup, and once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Nearly every image that comes to mind when you think ancient Egypt is a tomb, a temple, or something pulled out of one. Masks, coffins, pyramids, painted tomb walls, mummies, all of it comes from the industry built around death. That makes Egypt look like a society obsessed with dying for 3,000 straight years, which is roughly the conclusion European travelers reached for about 4 centuries. But there's a simple reason the evidence looks that way. Tombs and temples were built from stone because they were meant to last forever. Everything else, homes, workshops, market stalls, storage buildings, basically the entire physical setting of daily life, was built from sun-dried mud brick. Mud brick doesn't last. It needs repair every generation or so, and once abandoned, it just turns back into dirt. Add the yearly flood, which was excellent for growing crops and terrible for preserving buildings, and you get a kind of accidental filing error that has shaped how the whole world pictures Egypt. We didn't uncover a culture obsessed with death. We uncovered the one part of it that happened to survive. So can we actually piece together the ordinary day? Surprisingly, yes, better than for almost any other ancient culture. Thanks to one village, one dry hillside, and thousands of broken pottery pieces once used as scrap notepaper. Before getting to the daily schedule, you need to understand the year, because in Egypt the year shaped the day in ways we'd find hard to imagine. The Nile flooded every summer. Snowmelt and monsoon rains from the Ethiopian highlands surged down the river, covered the farmland, then pulled back and left a layer of rich black silt. It was so fertile that Egyptians named their country after it, Kemet, the Black Land, as opposed to Deshret, the Red Land, the desert, reserved for dying and burial. Egyptians didn't use 4 seasons. They used 3, and each one was basically a job title. Ake, the flooding, ran roughly July to October. Fields underwater, no farming possible, essentially 4 months of forced unemployment. Parate, the growing season, ran October to February. The water recedes, the soil softens, and you plow and plant. Shimu, the harvest, ran February to June. Cutting, threshing, hauling grain, followed by the tax collector showing up with a measuring rope and a bad mood. Keep that 4-month gap in mind, because when the entire farming population of the wealthiest kingdom on earth suddenly has nothing to do, it becomes very relevant to who actually built the pyramids. One more point on timekeeping. Egyptians measured hours, but not the way we do. They split daylight into 12 segments and night into 12 segments, no matter the season, which meant a summer hour ran longer than a winter hour. The hour itself stretched and shrank with the sun. They tracked this with shadow clocks and later water clocks, containers with a hole that drained at a steady rate. Nobody could be late, in our sense, because there was no unit small enough to measure lateness. You woke before sunrise because the sun ran your whole schedule. Homes had small, high windows and no glass, and afternoons got brutally hot, so the important work happened before noon. There's a touching detail here too. In the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, homes had a small enclosed platform near the entrance, often decorated with images tied to household protection and childbirth. Historians still debate its exact purpose, but the fact that it sat right by the front door tells you something about what mattered most. Egyptian beer was thick, low in alcohol, made from barley and wheat, and closer to a thin porridge than anything you'd order at a bar today. It provided calories and safe drinking liquid. Children drank it. Workers were paid partly in it. Ration records from Deir el-Medina show a standard daily allowance of several loaves of bread and a couple of jars of beer. And here's the grim part. Egyptian bread was full of grit. Some blew in from the desert. Some came from the grinding stones themselves, and it ground human teeth down like sandpaper. Look at Egyptian mummies, royalty included, and the dental damage is severe. Molars worn flat. Jaw infections large enough to spot instantly. Even the most powerful ruler of his era, builder of massive monuments, died with an infected mouth that would have caused him near constant pain. All the wealth of the Nile Valley, and nobody could fix a toothache. Your day depended entirely on who you were. If you were a farmer, and about 9 in 10 people were, your day revolved around water and mud. Hauling buckets, maintaining irrigation ditches, lifting water using a counterweight pole and bucket tool, so well designed it's still used along the Nile today. Planting meant walking backward while scattering seed, then driving animals over the field to press it into the soil. Harvest meant bending over with a hand sickle from sunrise to sunset. Then the officials arrived. Tomb paintings show surveyors measuring fields with knotted rope to calculate taxes, and in the same paintings, a farmer being beaten for falling short. It wasn't hidden. To the person commissioning the art, that scene simply represented a properly managed estate. If you were a craftsman at Deir el-Medina, you had one of the strangest jobs in the ancient world. You lived in a walled desert village on the west bank of Thebes, and your job, along with your father's and eventually your son's, was carving and painting royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. You were a trained specialist, likely able to read at least a little, paid by the state in grain, fish, produce, oil, and beer. Your week ran 10 days, and crews worked 8 of them with 2 off. During the working stretch, you didn't commute the long, hot path over the hill. You slept in stone huts on the ridge and only went home on your days off. 8 on, 2 off. Bronze Age workers essentially invented the weekend, then made it slightly longer to earn. If you were a scribe, you'd made it. Literacy sat around 1% of the population, maybe lower, and it was the one dependable path out of physical labor. Egyptians knew this and weren't subtle about it. A well-known instructional text has a father listing every trade in the country to talk his son into scribal school. The potter dirtier than livestock, the metal worker's hands like leather, the barber exhausted from chasing customers, the fisherman working among crocodiles, not a metaphor. That was the actual job. The laundry worker cleaning clothes on a riverbank next to those same crocodiles. The recurring message, become a scribe, because scribes give orders instead of taking beatings. Some career advice never expires. If you were a woman, your day started earlier, and grinding grain is what wore your body down. Turning wheat into flour meant kneeling and rocking a stone back and forth for hours. Skeletons of Egyptian women show exactly the damage you'd expect. Worn knees, joint damage in the toes, lower back arthritis. You can read the labor directly off the bones. But here's the surprising part. Egyptian women held legal rights that would have been unimaginable in classical Athens or Rome. They could own and inherit property, sign contracts, initiate divorce, and testify or sue in court. Surviving records show women buying, selling, lending, and filing lawsuits, legally freer than a Greek woman 1,000 years later, even while her spine was being ground down by a millstone. Midday and the evidence that changes everything. Midday brought a break, food, and shade, with the main meal usually eaten later in the evening. The food itself was better than most people assume. Bread, beer, onions, garlic, leeks, lettuce, cucumbers, lentils, chickpeas, dates, figs, grapes, pomegranates, river fish, and dried meat for the wealthy or during festivals, which happened constantly. Grooming mattered a lot too. Egyptians, by the standards of neighboring cultures, were remarkably focused on cleanliness. Daily bathing where water allowed, body hair routinely removed with razors and tweezers by men and women alike. The black eyeliner so associated with Egypt wasn't purely cosmetic either. It was made mostly from a lead-based mineral, and a 2010 lab study on residue from ancient makeup containers found lead compounds that don't occur naturally, meaning they were deliberately manufactured. Researchers suggested these compounds might trigger a mild immune response that could help fight eye infections common along a river full of standing water and insects. The theory isn't fully settled and should be held loosely, but there's a real chance the most iconic cosmetic in history doubled as medicine. Now here's where it gets genuinely exciting. Everything covered so far comes from tomb art, grave goods, skeletons, and formal writings made by elites, for elites. But Deir el-Medina gave us something completely different, and it's one of archaeology's great strokes of luck. Papyrus was expensive, so workers used broken pottery shards and flat limestone flakes as everyday scrap paper, then tossed them in a pit. The desert climate meant nothing decomposed. Thousands of these have been recovered, not monuments, but notes, shopping lists, debts owed, love poems, complaints, sketches, a child's handwriting practice, an inventory of donkeys. Among them sits a document I think about constantly, an attendance record listing workers by name, day by day, with the reason each man missed work. The reasons include sick, eye problem, scorpion sting, brewing beer, building his house, preparing his mother's burial. His daughter had started her period and he stayed home with her, attending a festival, making an offering, out with his supervisor, and in several cases, entries historians read as a man simply being hungover. A recorded hangover, on file, 3,200 years later. These were named individuals, Pinjua, Seba, Apehidi, men whose absence from work on some ordinary day is now permanently documented. It goes further still. Around 1157 BC, grain payments to the Deir el-Medina workers were repeatedly delayed, so the crews stopped working. They walked out of the valley and staged a sit-in near a royal mortuary temple, refusing to leave until they were paid. We know this because the village scribe wrote the whole event down in what's now called the Turin Strike Papyrus. Their words survive. Essentially, we are hungry. 18 days of the month have already passed. Officials were sent, excuses were made, and the workers returned the next day and did it again. It's the earliest documented labor strike in recorded history, carried out by the very men building a royal tomb against the administration that was supposed to pay them. And in 2013, a French team working at Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast uncovered the oldest inscribed papyri ever found, dating to roughly 2560 BC. Among them is a logbook kept by a supervisor named Mirror, who led a crew of about 40 men hauling limestone. His team sailed from the quarries to the pyramid site, loaded blocks, delivered them, and repeated the trip, which took a few days round trip, and he logged every single run, where they went, what they carried, who they answered to. We have a shift record from the construction of the Great Pyramid, written by the guy running the boat. 3 things stand out here, and they build on one another. First, Egypt's workforce was not enslaved labor. This is where the flood season comes back in. For 4 months a year, farmland sat underwater, and the entire agricultural workforce had no crops to tend. So the state fed them, housed them, and put them to work moving stone. The excavated workers' settlement near the pyramids has bakeries, breweries, and huge amounts of cattle bone, meaning these workers ate beef regularly. The nearby cemetery shows burials done with care, and skeletons show healed fractures, meaning someone set the broken bones and fed these workers while they recovered. That's not a description of forced labor. That's a state-run project with a cafeteria and a clinic. Second, the texture of an ordinary Egyptian day was strikingly normal. Wake up, eat bread, go to work, complain about work, deal with family, eat again, play a board game, sleep on the roof. The board games found in tombs are identical to the ones found in regular houses. People wrote love poetry, plenty of it about lying awake because of someone. Third, and this is the real takeaway, we misunderstood Egypt for 4 centuries for a reason that has nothing to do with Egyptians themselves. The stone lasted. The mud didn't. We inherited the funeral wing of a civilization and mistook it for the entire building. It took a trash pit full of broken pottery in a workers' village to hand back the ordinary parts of life, which, It turns out, made up most of it. The pyramids weren't the point. The pyramids were what happened to survive. Here's what stays with me. Sometime around 1157 BC, a man walked out of the Valley of the Kings because his pay was late. He was hungry, frustrated, and had a family to feed. So he sat down in the shade of an old temple with his co-workers and refused to move. A scribe, probably wishing he were anywhere else, wrote it down. That man never got a statue or a monument. He got a single line in an administrative record on a material nobody expected to survive, and it outlasted the empire, the language, and the entire idea of ancient Egypt. It's sitting in a museum today. 3,000 years from now, most of what exists today will be gone. The buildings, the records, the photos. If anything survives, it will probably be something that seemed disposable at the time. A note, a complaint, a record of the one day you didn't show up. So tonight, when you lie down to sleep, you're doing roughly what someone on a mud roof in ancient Thebes did. Head on something hard, listening to the wind, thinking about the stretch of workdays ahead and the short break waiting at the end of it. Same sun, same tiredness, same idea of a weekend. They just had to wait 10 days for theirs. So here's the question. A 10-day week, 8 days on and 2 off, paid entirely in bread and beer. Would you take that deal? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this from ancient history, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. See you soon.